everybody, welcome to CAF Warbird Tube, the show where we talk about World War II, aviation, history, and so much more. Warbird Tube is produced by the Commemorative Air Force, the world's largest flying museum. Our mission is to educate, inspire, and honor through flight and living history experiences. The CAF began the Warbird movement more than 65 years ago, and thanks to the support of individuals like you, we continue to grow strong. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and now our host, Steve Buss. Thanks for watching and keep them flying.
Good evening and welcome everyone. This is episode number 107 of Warbird Tube, and tonight we're going to visit a very influential location in aviation history, and that's aviation history in the Houston, Texas area. Now, before we get started, please do us a favor. If you haven't already done so, take a second to like, share, or subscribe and follow us. And if you do subscribe on YouTube, click the bell icon. You'll get notifications about new episodes of Warbird Tube when they become available. Now, as you're listening to our presenter tonight, you may have some questions. Just type them in the comments section and we'll try to answer them either during the presentation or before we sign off. We'll save some time for questions at the end for sure. So joining me right now is aviation historian Michael Bludworth. Michael, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here. And before you dive into the history of aviation in Houston, tell us a little bit about your background and what piques your interest about aviation.
Well, I love to fly, don't we all? And the interest, particular interest in, of course, restoration of various warbirds, old aircraft.
Yeah.
So much history there. So much of Texas history is built on aviation after, well, since the first airplane flight in Texas was in Houston, since 1909.
Wow.
So there's a lot to be interested in, and then there's the history of it.
Yeah. So let's go ahead. Let's dive in. I see the first slide you have up, Ellington in 1918.
Well, what we're going to do here is we're going to look at old Ellington, the beginnings of Ellington, the people who are involved with it, and happily there's a good photo record. You're actually looking at the frontispiece from a publication by the Army Air Corps in 1918. This is a yearbook. Almost all the various training bases produced yearbooks, and this is one of them. I colored it in red, but that doesn't matter. It's still a very interesting. You'll see this actual formation in one of the photos we look at. Ellington, as you know, was opened in 2017, which means that it's over 100 years old. And sure enough, the city of Houston, which now operates Ellington as Ellington Airport, or actually Ellington Spaceport, celebrated the 100th anniversary in 2017. This is a photo that shows Mayor Turner, a councilman, various members of the public, and of course a large cake prepared by the Houston airport people. And so we had a party. What can I say? This is the most common photo that people see when they think of Ellington. This is a very common photo. It shows the entire facility laid out at its peak. This is November 11th, Veterans Day or Armistice Day in 1918. And there's just so much to see here. They built all these buildings within the span of a year. And it's nice to take a look around and see that it's very flat. There are no trees. And sometimes you think you can see the Gulf of Mexico in the distance. This has always made the coast of Texas and Texas in general a good place for aviation because there isn't anything to get in the way.
What kind of buildings are we looking at there on the photo?
Well, these hangars are off to the left, the row of the hangars, and they stretch for quite a distance. On the inside, we see, of course, the barracks, repair shops, the mess, all the other things. This is a very, very large installation. Every bit of this was torn down. There is none of this here today. In San Antonio, you can go to, I believe, Brooks, where they have preserved one of these World War I hangars, and it's open as a museum. And it's quite something to see. There's a lot of wood here, and there's a lot of potential for fire in it. We're going to move on to the next slide to answer the question that I get asked a lot. Why is it Ellington? Who is Ellington? And here's Ellington. This is Lieutenant Eric Ellington. And he was killed in 1914 in a crash in California. He's standing in front of a Wright military flyer, which is what he trained in. And so why do they name a airport or a base in Texas after this fellow who is not from Texas that died in California? And the thing you have to remember is that Ellington is not the first military operation that was run by the government in the Houston area. That outfit was called Texas City. This is the first squadron of the air signal, of the Signal Corps. And it was down in Texas City in 1913. And what we're looking at here is a Wright flyer in Texas City in 1913. And it was in Texas City that Lieutenant Eric Ellington learned to fly and was an instructor. They only lasted down in Texas City from April to October of 1913, and then they lit out of there to go to San Antonio. The mud and the mosquitoes were just too much. And that's an episode that will come back. Here's another photo from Texas City. This is a hydro aeroplane, the War Hydro. And if you look closely, if you know your airplanes, it is manufactured by the Wrights, but it's actually a Burgess Wright aircraft. You can look at the tailplanes. This is what a terrible airplane. But this is how you find out how these things work. But the Burgess tractor airplanes made their debut in Texas in 1913, and Eric Ellington was there in Texas City. What a great photo. Part of my pleasure that I get is doing research and digging in to the old photos to try and figure out where and when and who. And I've gotten to know a lot of people that had died a long time ago. And it's great to see this stuff at Texas City. By the way, there's an excellent museum in Texas City that shows all this and more. Here's what I get most of my information from. These are the yearbooks put out by the various Army bases. You see Ream Field, which we're going to talk about in a moment. Ellington, 1918, off to the side there, and then two 1943 yearbooks. The 5th Aryan Group, by the way, was based at Love Field, and of course, Ellington. Each one of these contains a history, and they're quite valuable when we go back as far as Ellington in 1917, 1918, to get the story straight, because there are a lot of stories. So let's move on to Ellington, and here's what you're looking at. Now, Ellington was a training base. They trained to fly, obviously. Its specialties were in bombing, believe it or not, and we'll see that in a moment, aerial observation, and of course, just simply learning to fly. This is a primary base. This is what you do here. And this is typical. This aircraft is typical. It's a Jenny, a JN4, or maybe a JN2, but it's very typical of the aircraft. And they had a lot of them. Here we see a number of the aircraft stretched out over the field, and a very common one. The focus of this photo, and if you can look here, obviously, you see the white JN4, the red crosses. That is an ambulance plane. Ellington was at the forefront of developing aircraft for use as an aerial ambulance. And you're looking at that JN4 there, decked out. And we're going to see it again and see some other ones. This was a new thing. In 1917, it was all new. So
Right.
you can come up with a lot of the things we take for granted today. Once again, a good look at the field. It's sandy, it's grass. We'll see some other photos. I don't know how much they would cut these, but well, you'll see in the upcoming photos some of the ground conditions. It was not fun. This is one of the instructors, and you know it's an instructor because they sat in the back and the student is in front. And since this is an observation and photography outfit, well, you got a picture. And it's a great look. And if you look down there, that's Houston down below. It's the Hyde Park area. You can actually tell. Ellington was very much a part of the Houston experience. Although Ellington itself, of course, was halfway to Galveston. The only way you could get there is on the interurban. Few people had a car, and of course that was a long trip from Ellington, from downtown Houston. But with the interurban, you're able to get to downtown pretty quickly, and there are quite a number of publications, Tailwinds, for instance, that show entertainment that was trying to be sold to the cadets, a very large layout. Houston also had another Army base called Camp Logan up near Memorial in Houston, and they had a labor strike, and they took the troops from Camp Logan down to help build out Ellington in 1917 to speed it up. Let's see what comes up next. If you notice at the bottom, it says Houston, and this comes from a scrapbook. And it's wonderful to be able to find these old scrapbooks that have these photos. It is a training base. You are going to learn to fly. The problem with that is there aren't very many Army aviators. Most of the instructors were civilians. And here's a great picture of Mutt Fedler, who was a civilian and an instructor at Ellington. Matter of fact, quite a number of Houstonian civil aviators were instructors. Shorty Walker, who was the first Houstonian to fly in 1910, signed on, and he based himself in San Antonio and taught flight in San Antonio at Randolph there. Well, what a great picture here of a civilian instructor. And I'll point out the grass here does not seem to be cut. Here's another ambulance plane. There were two main aircraft that were based at Ellington. One was the JN-4, the Jenny, as we saw. The other one was a DH-4, the de Havilland 4. And the de Havilland was a bomber in their designations. And that meant it could carry more weight, a bigger airplane, and we'll see a comparison in a moment. But here it is configured as an ambulance plane. Here's a Jenny, and believe it or not, this one is going up on a bombing mission. This is for a training mission. Now, I've colorized this photo, and I'm not happy with it, but there it is. Like it or leave it. There are two things that should be pointed out here, but you need to look at. The one is that the bomb has a streamer on it. You see it below. That's because they would go up, they drop the bomb, and you can watch the streamer on the bomb going down, and you learn from that. The next thing, of course, is that the Jenny engine, the Curtiss OX-5, is uncowled. It's simply up there in its frame. And that should tell you, because this photo was taken in July and it's hot. So what do? You take all that stuff off. That's just part of the things you have to do as a practical matter in trying to make things go. But once again, what a great picture of an everyday activity at Ellington in 1917. I don't know who these people are. I know it's March 1919. I think the guy on, well, my left is a sergeant, and the guy in white is a mechanic. Oftentimes, the mechanics wore special clothing to distinguish them because it's mechanics that make it go. and they were accorded special honors. But isn't it great to see these people? We think about the machines
Right.
at this time and focus on them, but we must never forget that there are people behind it. There are people flying them, maintaining them, organizing them. It's good to know the people. And I wish I knew who these two were.
Yeah. I just think it's amazing that you put a mechanic in in a white suit, considering the work they have to do.
Yeah,
Again, as you mentioned, it was almost an honor or recognition, pointing out that this is the mechanics who's one of the people who's keeping all the airplanes in the air.
right. Well, and this was, high science.
Yeah.
This is rocket ship stuff. Not everyone could tinker with an engine. And yes, they were accorded special honors because of that. When the railroad companies switched over from steam to diesel, the engineers started wearing white for the same reason.
Oh.
They no longer had to get dirty and they wanted to stand out. Human nature is forever.
I guess.
Here's that ambulance plane. Now, I've colorized this photo, and they were very proud of the ambulance plane. I hate to think of a Jenny with that much load in it, going very far, very fast. But you got to try, and they did, and there it is. What was I saying about grass?
Yeah.
And here's our first wreck. I mean, I don't know how you can fly in that stuff, and I don't know how often they mowed it or if they had runways they mowed. It's a good thing they got off the ground so quick. What a great photo, a very typical photo. Here we're on parade. I don't know the circumstances of this. Well, I do a little bit. It's November 11th, 1918, Armistice Day. And there are various things going on, but it's a nice row of vintage cars and airplanes. It was a trip to go to Ellington on a car in this time. Once again, look to the horizon. There's nothing there. What a great place for an airfield. No trees, no nothing. In 1919, March 1919, the Ellington was visited by an Handley Page 0400, or as we say, a giant bomber. And it was a big deal. Of course, it was after World War I, and it was a recruiting drive. And they flew this airplane all around the United States. It's an RAF plane, of course. And they did bring it to Houston. And here it is on the field, and next to it is the DH-4 and the Jenny, and it's an excellent comparison of the size. And don't you know, this was a very impressive airplane to have. And of course, that's why it's a recruitment tool. I think I have some more photos here. Yes, anyone who lives in Houston recognizes where this airplane is in Pasadena. The oil tanks are still there. It's going down Route 225. The oil tanks are still there. I'm sure they've been replaced. They took up various local dignitaries and officials and all the rest, and the press, and the rest of them on this giant airplane in 1919. Here it is again. Once again, I love to see these casual photos where they're not posing. You see a photographer off to the right there taking a picture of it, as well as the maintenance vehicles. I don't think it ever carried any bombs when it was here, but that wasn't really the point of it. You see the ladder, the 12-foot ladder to the right there. It gives you an indication. It must have really been something to see this large airplane. And of course, it came across the Atlantic to get here too. This is 1919. This is early. Uh-oh.
Oh.
I wish I knew more about this photo because it's interesting. The notes say it's San Leon, which is a peninsula down near Texas City. If you notice that there is a engine stand underneath the front of the engine, and there is a guy, it looks like, that is kneeling towards the rear of it. So the water is not very deep here. But how deep does it need to be if you're not a float plane? I have so many photos of wrecked aircraft, destroyed aircraft in every sort of condition, as you might imagine from there. But this one I thought was of particular interest, a novel. He may have hit and flipped over, who knows? But don't worry, the mechanics, the guy in the white suit, is gonna fix it.
Well, that is amazing because when you look at it, and first of all, as you point out, it's in very, very shallow water, but then to see it upside down and no like visible wrinkles in the fuselage or the wings that would, whatever it did, it had to do it at a very slow speed.
Yeah.
That's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And once again, it's a good thing you're going 50, 60 miles an hour. And he who knows, he ran out of fuel, engine seized, whatever, and all he saw was water, and well, there he is. A lot better, probably hoping he was going to come down to something softer than dirt.
Yep.
Great photo, and that looks like some type of boat off to the left there. And that's the thing, you know, you look at water, it could be 12 feet deep, it could be 12 inches deep. You don't know until you get there. This is one of those interesting photos. The base started construction in June of 1917, and by November of 1917, they were flying. And one of the very first things they did was to fly this group here of airplanes up to buzz the city. They dropped Red Cross promotions and recruitment promotions in the city, and it caused a big hubbub. And there were, of course, the news stories and all the rest of them. And it's just fabulous to be able to find a documented photo that exhibits this welcoming of Ellington, or Ellington welcoming Houston, with the formation of airplanes flying around. As I had shown before, you might want to look again and notice there are cowlings missing on these aircraft. Once again, just an attempt to try and keep it a little bit cooler. I don't think they had any glycol or anything like that. I think they were using good old water. And in a humid environment, tough situation. This photo, again, just shows, as it says, lines and lines of aircraft at Ellington. And sure enough, and there's that road, we saw it earlier, I guess it's the parade ground, and it's lined with all these Jennies. And of course, we get to point out that there's that ambulance plane again on the left there. They were proud of the innovation of making an ambulance plane. Even in that day, to be able to fly an injured cadet from Ellington to Houston to a real hospital would have been a big deal. And it was a new thing. So there's a lot of innovation that takes place just for practical reasons. What a great photo. And here's another one. This is, again, a very typical situation. This tree has leapt up and caught this airplane. And you can see, because there's not very much damage, he wasn't going very fast either. We see these all the time, and you're going to see a couple more before we're done. There are a number of special events that happened at Ellington while it was there. And in one of them, in this one, as a great shot of the headquarters. I had to restore this photo, by the way. You weren't able to read any of that. And what we're looking at is these are visiting flying officers from the Allied nations. I don't know all of them, but I can tell they're Frenchmen, Englishmen. There's even one looks like an Indian, which of course be the British Commonwealth. So there are a couple of GIs there, but we've got a collection of aviators from around the Allied world in 1918 come to Ellington. Ellington was a big base, an important base, a very large training base. Easy to get to because you can drive your ship to Houston and come on down. Bunch of spit and polish there. I wish I knew who they were. This is more typical. We get to see an up close of one of the hangars at Ellington's. And below we see an aircraft with a bunch of people. And beyond that, I do not know who those people are or what the occasion is. As I noted in the outline that I gave you, Ellington would close and reopen several times. It would close in 1920, reopen in 1921, close again in 21, reopen in 23, and then finally shut down for good in 26. And in 1930, they razed the entire airfield. All those buildings, like the one you see here, every blasted one of them was knocked down and they burned them. The only thing that was left was a water tower. And that was the situation in 1930. And it's it's unfortunate that nothing is left. But once again, the fact that that vintage hangar is available and open to the public at Brooks in San Antonio makes it even more interesting. Here are the troops. Everybody signed up for muster. Once again, Armistice Day, 1918. And here they're marching off to war. 1918, actually, the war is over. And we'll hear more about that as we get down to Ream Field. This is a very interesting photo that I came across. This is General Pershing off to the left there. And these are a bunch of Chinese aviators. And they've come over, I mean, you know, from China. And in 1920, that's not a casual trip, but they have come over to see how things go. And that's just General Pershing to the left there, I think maybe with the back to us talking to that guy and showing them how things work at an Army base. I'm sure they went through California and took a train to get to Houston. But just a fascinating photo. And once again, you know, they're showing off their best stuff. And in this case, it was in Ellington.
Do you know if any of those people who are in that photo, any of the Chinese nationals, did they learn to fly or did they take flight training or are they just here observing?
I think they're here observing. I'm sure some of them flew, but they were observing. They were observing what we were doing. I guess the United States considered them a potential market for aircraft, and we did send quite a number of aircraft. And as a matter of fact, quite a number of aircraft that were manufactured in Houston using Super Gnome engines were sold by the thousands to the Far East. Houston was a major center for aircraft engine production. This is something that only happened for a few years. So maybe they're here checking out the market. Look, another ambulance plane on the ground at Ellington. This is a Douglas C-1. And in this case, it's been configured to be an ambulance. This is a great photo showing how they continue to develop the concept. Unlike the DH-4 and the JN-4, the C-1 could accommodate 2 litter patients inside along with an attendant in an enclosed cabin. So this is a great leap forward in technology. once again, on the field, check the grass. What a nice picture of Ellington and their continued development of an ambulance plane. In 1923, it was shut down. Ellington was closed. And then in 1923, it was opened again. And this time it was opened, they didn't call them National Guard bases yet, but that's what it was. And the National Guard unit that was formed there was the Texas 36th. And here we see the Texas 36, all of them, on the field. This is also the start for the 147th Fighter Group and the 111th Observation Group, both groups which are still in existence today and still based at Ellington. So this is a true start of these local outfits. I've colorized this photo, and the color really makes things stand out. Sometimes it works very well. It's an AI program, and sometimes it works well, and sometimes it works better than others, and sometimes I really have to help it. I love having these high resolution black and white photos, but when I do presentations, I know that the color engages the audiences so much quicker and so much more fully. So as you're seeing, using a mix, and you got to give it a break. We're colorizing photos here from the teens, more than 100 years ago, and sometimes they don't turn out like the way that photos do now. You have to remember that photography developed alongside of aviation. And just as aviation made strides early on, so did photography. And they practiced photography and aviation side by side. And we're lucky to get the results from these early experiments, all the experiments. Remember, this is also an aerial photographic group. So here we are at 36 Texas again, and we have you can see their insignia there. Looks like a jaguar or a lion or something, and frankly, I have not found that anywhere yet. I'd like to see it. But more important than that, we have Walter Reed and Bernard Law. Walter Reed is, and this is not the Walter Reed of Walter Reed Hospital in DC. That Reed is R-E-E-D. This is R-E-I-D. This is Walter Reed, would eventually become Major Reed. He learned to fly in Ellington in 1917-18, hung around, became the commander of the 36th, and would go on to command Ellington in 1940. He is a fixture in local aviation history in Houston, would consult with the city of Houston on its airports and its situations for decades to come. And it's quite an important fixture. I'm so happy to have photos like this, where we can see these people that we have forgotten, and we have forgotten what they've done to get us where we are today. Bernard Law is someone I'm still researching to get more information on. He did not learn at Ellington. He was part of the 2nd Provisional Detachment. And that's the next side of our story, because Ellington was not the only Army Air Base at this time in the Houston area. Ellington, as you know, was a training base. You learn, very basically, you would learn to fly at Ellington. But in the summer of 1918, they put the 2nd Provisional Detachment and made an airport for them up at Park Place. Park Place is now considered a subdivision of Houston, but in 1918, it was its own city. And the 2nd Provisional Wing was a combat outfit. This was not where you went to learn to fly. This is where you learn to fly in combat. and they were scheduled to go to Europe and engage in combat. Obviously, when you get installed in the summer of 1918 and the war is over in November of 1918, they didn't get very far, and it disappeared very quickly into history. They're getting at the paraphernalia. I happen to have their yearbook. I don't know how much you can see of that, but this is their yearbook, and it's called Overseas Dreams. Their whole thing was to go overseas and fight in Europe. And it's only by this book and legend that we know anything about what became known as Ream Field for about 2 weeks, but it's usually called Park Place. Here's Walter Reed again, and this is 1940 when he was a commander of Ellington in 1940, which is another presentation. The National Guard, which was established in 1923 at Ellington, that's the 147th National Guard, was moved to Houston Municipal Airport in 1926 and based there. And what you're seeing in this fabulous photo, although it is 1935, this is the 147th at Houston Municipal Airport, where they have 2 hangars and various other, and of course it's an observation. So they have these wonderful Douglas 043s, and everybody's lined up to play Weekend Warrior. And that's where Ellington was closed. In 1930, they raised it. So the flying continued at Houston Municipal Airport, but Ellington itself would not be resurrected until we approached World War II. And in 1940, they would begin building Ellington anew. But this photo showing the 147th at Houston Airport, the Houston Airport in 1935, is a wonderful thing to have. And of course, this is the anniversary F-16 that was painted to celebrate the 100th for the 147th and the 111th. History is very important to any fighting outfit. Here's that book I just showed you for the 2nd Provisional Wing at Park Place, and we get to see an aerial of it. There's a lot to see here, but let's just take a moment. The straight line, the very straight diagonal line, is the interurban that would go from Houston to Galveston, and it went through Park Place. And what you're seeing is the Park Place base in front of you. And what you need to see here is that, of course, it's tents. Unlike Ellington, there are no solid buildings here. There are just tents. And if you look closely on the left side of your screen, those are airplane tents or tent hangars. They are canvas hangars to cover each individual aircraft. And that is the extent of the base. Remember, it was provisional. They were going overseas, so it was a temporary assignment. But this is a fabulous aerial picture showing them in Park Place, Texas in 1918 with their airplanes, their gear, and their grounds. And I think the next picture shows you the problem, which I think we saw in the very first image that we saw. This the problem in Texas City, the problem in Ellington, the problem at Ream Field, and of course it's still a problem today, mud and rain. And if you look at these tents in the mud and the rain and the flood, and it did flood, and you think about all those airplanes in their canvas tents, you know it was just a mess. Matter of fact, in their yearbook, they do talk about the mud as being an important part of the players in the entire situation. They, of course, would have encountered mud in Europe as well. But you know, it was miserable, just absolutely miserable.
If you could back up to the last picture with the overhead, one
Yeah.
of our viewers is wondering where exactly are the runways in this photo.
Well, of course, it's just the field, and it'd have to
Okay.
be probably at the bottom of the screen. There's no runway; it's just an open
Okay.
field.
So just take off or land whichever way the wind is blowing.
Yes,
Okay.
that's Pine Gully Creek, by the way. Man, you can find this on the map, and this circular drive in the middle is Joplin Drive, and it's still there in Park Place. We drive through Park Place on the way to Hobby Airport, and you don't even think about it. And for quite frankly, most people did not know. But that's my job as a historian, is to find this stuff and get it out and let everyone know what kind of history is beneath your feet. And this was particularly rewarding. Back to mud. And I think we have one more to go here. Well, two more actually. Once again, these various scrapbooks that you find at estate sales, and you don't, and of course eBay and places like that. But since it has an inscription on it, 2nd Provisional Wing Formation, Park Place, Houston, is concrete evidence that is actually there. They're actually doing things. And of course, here they are in Jenny's again. Still, and they are actively prepping to go to Europe to war. Now, I think the next one, yes, and we're right on time, is the last image in this presentation. And this is an actual color image from the Ream Field scrapbook. I did not colorize this. I just scanned it. But of course, it shows you what the most common aspect of flight training is, and that is crashing. Once again, these trees have leapt up and pulled this airplane out of the air, and happily at a low speed. So let's hope that nobody got hurt. As a matter of fact, let me show you their yearbook again. Now you can see it's made out of a tawny color. That is fabric from the airplanes, from the wrecked airplanes. They used the fabric as the cover material for their yearbook in 1918. So that's right down to the brass tacks there. And with this, that concludes a look at early Army aviation in Houston with an emphasis on Ellington. We quickly went over Texas City. We came up and spent some time at Ream Field and Park Place, the little known training base that existed for a matter of months in Houston. Now I'm ready for questions if there are any.
Well, yeah. Hopefully, some of our listeners will have some questions. I've got a second screen here, and I just pulled up Joplin Street in Houston, and sure enough, that circle is still there. But you would, unless you knew the story, you would not know what took place there during or just after World War I.
No, there is no evidence whatsoever at Park Place of this at all ever. But of course, there wasn't much.
Right.
You know, the same thing happened to Ellington in 1930. They took bulldozers to it and made a big fire and burned everything and gave it back to the farmers.
Really?
Yeah.
So, are there any other airfields in Texas, training bases at least, that can trace their lineage back this far?
Well, of course, San Antonio with Randolph Brooks and the other one, they all date from about the same time.
Okay.
We saw that Burgess 8 in Texas City, and that Burgess had flown from San Antonio, setting a speed record, by the way, in 1913. So these are just a local training field. San Antonio was, now I'm not, I don't do Texas aviation history, but San Antonio also dates from 1911 to 1913. Dallas Love was a big training field. But once again, 1917 is when Dallas Love became a training base.
So with Ellington in its early years, opening, closing, opening, closing, you said they gave the land back to the farmers. Then did the government reclaim the land when they needed to reopen the field?
Well, they leased it back to the farmers.
Okay.
They
Okay.
didn't let it go. I need to emphasize that in 1917, 1930, and 1940, Ellington, where Ellington was situated, is nowhere. It is open fields, and it's not near a big city.
Right.
It's nowhere. It's not like there was a demand for it. But of course, that was its attraction, is there wasn't any competition for the area. You could have all the land you wanted, and they did. And even by 1940, the area was still a big, wide open space. By the way, the blueprints for the 1940 Ellington located as Genoa, Texas, not as Ellington, which it's not a city, but Genoa, which is a small city that is up the road from where Ellington is now.
Why do you think that Ellington has, since 1940, has continued to be operational?
Once again, lots of open land, no trees, very few things to get in the way. It's next to the coast. Ships can come in and go out. There's a lot of material that needs to be protected in our area. It's a great place for a joint base that both trains and defends.
As we're talking about Houston, there are a number of airports that are in the greater Houston area. So, and I know Park Place is not there anymore, and Reams Field isn't either. Are there any others that survived or were established in the early 20s or so that still exist today?
Well, no, not exist today. As I'd mentioned, the National Guard left Ellington and came up to Houston Municipal Airport. And that airport opened in June of 1926. We now call that Hobby Airport. And if you do your math, you'll notice that means that Hobby Airport is coming up on its 100th anniversary. The National Guard came up in 26, and with the interruption of World War II, considered they would remain at Hobby Airport as a National Guard, Air National Guard, until 1956. So that's a long history of the Air National Guard at what is now Hobby Airport. Hobby Airport, the Houston airport, was not the first airport. In Houston, there was the Bel Air Field, and Rice University had a field, Rice Field. And those date, once again, 1917, 1918.
Amazing. But, almost sounds like the Hobby Field and the Hobby family would be a subject for another webinar somewhere down the road.
Well, several. Several, because it was the Houston Municipal Airport, then it became the Houston International Airport, then it became Hobby Airport. So yes, there's a tremendous amount. Once again, I recommend, if you want to learn more, you go to Houston's Aviation History, my group on Facebook, where we do that every day. And there's a lot of history there. Houston has been the center. Well, we talked about Texas City. Jimmy Waddell came out of Texas City, and he was the one that was enthused by the flyers there. Jimmy Waddell went on to found the only airline founded in Louisiana, would set a number of racing records and design aircraft. Quite a number of Southeast Texas natives went on to aviation greatness. Why is this flashing red at me?
I have no idea. We've talked about the early days of aviation and a few of the famous aviators that were there. Any other notable names that came out of training at Ellington prior to World War II?
None that I can put my finger on. Obviously, Reed would not have known, would not be known. Bernard Law, No, I don't know of any distinguished ones. Lindbergh was not even a factor in Houston's aviation history either.
Wow.
He came through on his way to San Antonio before he was famous.
Okay. And when he did the tour after his transatlantic flight, did he come when he toured the United States? Did he come back to the Houston area at all? No.
He did not.
Oh.
He
Okay.
went to Port Aransas, and he went to Dallas,
Yeah.
and he went to San Antonio, but he did not come to Houston.
Oh. He
How
probably
about
didn't
that?
want to. He didn't want to go that far south and get in all that mud, right?
Probably. He had come through and stayed overnight at Rice Field when he was an airmail pilot and complained about the cold and the mud on his way. They all complained about the mud, but I tell you what, I complain about the mud, and you complain about the mud too. The Houston mud is prodigious. It rains too much here.
Yes. One of our viewers is asking, they read somewhere that Billy Mitchell had been at Ellington and
Oh,
praised
I'm sure.
the training and operations there.
I'm sure he did. They once Ellington was established, it was a major Army air base, and they all came through. So I can't tell you what page, but I'm confident he came through.
Dale is asking, says, I study World War II military aviation, in particular the 8th Air Force. Did Ellington contribute to America's aviation during World War II? And the answer to that would be obviously yes.
Oh yes, and a big yes. It was a multi-engine training facility, as well as photography, aerial photography, and bombing. But mostly it was multi-engine aircraft training. And we can do that another day. I've got those photos too.
And I was just going to interject that this first section was just really pre-World War II and the establishment of Ellington Field. Well, we will schedule another webinar down the road where we'll talk more in depth about what happened at Ellington during World War II and beyond.
Love to do it anytime.
Yeah, yeah. And we also want to remind folks of a couple other things. First of all, the CAF's Wings Over Houston Air Show is at Ellington the 14th and 15th of this year, 2023, 14th and 15th. So mark that on your calendar. And also, if you'd like to watch this again, we're going to post it up to YouTube, probably watch for it on Friday. You'll see it go live on YouTube there. Michael, you talked a little bit about the photos and some of your colorization using AI and things, but the black and white photos that you have, you mentioned the yearbooks. Where are some of the other places that you've been able to obtain some high resolution photographs that you've been able to use in your studies?
Well, once again, for these old ones, I depend on the scrapbooks.
Yeah.
And they can be scanned very well. Remember, a lot of these are photographic outfits, and they did their own photo processing and generated a lot of photos. As a Houstonian, I get to see pictures of downtown Houston in the late teens and 20s because that's where you go to take pictures. There are a number of resources that you can find. Of course, you go to your local libraries. The Texas Room at the Houston Public Library has quite a number of photos. There is really, I wouldn't say common, but there are many, many photos out there. I do like concentrating on less than the obvious. I mean, if I show you a picture of the P-47, well, isn't that nice? But by putting it in context about who, what, when, and where,
yeah,
you can make that P-47 a lot more interesting. I've got a picture of a Beech AT-11 at Ellington, which is very unusual. That's World War II, of course.
Yes, yeah. One of our viewers is asking if you know how the large European bomber made it across the Atlantic. Did they fly it or was it by ship?
You know, it's a good question, one I've asked myself. They might have flown it, but it would have been a hop, skip, and jump. I would think that they'd be prudent to put it on a boat.
What year did that? Did they bring that to Ellington? Is it 1919?
1919, March 1919. It was
Okay.
There's quite a bit of publicity that you can find about that, and they issued stamps and mail and all the rest commemorating the event. You've only seen a few of the things that are in my archives for that.
Yeah.
By the way, in 1919 in Texas, there was no airmail. So to do airmail out of Houston was a special event. Airmail had been established in 1918 nationally, but it did not make it to Houston until 1928. Okay. And of course, out of Houston Airport, not out of Ellington.
Wow.
Ellington would have its own, in World War II, Ellington would have its own post office.
Okay.
And newspaper and all the rest of it. It was a city in World War II. It's a very, very different animal than World War I.
Right. Well, like I said, we're going to schedule a time to talk about that very special animal in a future webinar. And now you've got my curiosity piqued, Michael. First of all, for showing us that picture of the bomber in 1919, but also from our viewer asking about whether it flew or not, because I don't know. You've intrigued me to do some digging, so I'm going to try and do some research and see if I can't come up with an answer for that. And if I do, I will post it in the comments section. But that was an era. Whether the twin engine bomber, that heavy bomber that came in 1919, flew or was on a ship.
Well, that's something that your questioner can look up, and we'd all like to know.
Yeah, I think so. Well, Michael, before we wrap up, any final thoughts tonight?
No, it's been fun. I enjoy this stuff. I wouldn't be doing it unless I did enjoy it. And it's great to be able to reach an audience. I think I'm going places where people have not gone before and digging up materials that are not familiar. And I think it's important to be able to tell those stories from these people. And these people are our ancestors that were here, that worked hard and fought to get us where we are now. And there are a lot of untold stories, and I'm doing what I can to bring those stories forward.
Excellent. And if folks want to follow your research, how can they find you on Facebook?
Well, I'm actually all on Facebook. Go to Houston's Aviation History, which is the primary site. I also aggregate air shows on the Texas Aviation Event Calendar, the TAEC, where I keep a list, an updated list of all the air shows happening in the Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma area. And I can tell you that we're not this weekend, but the weekend of the 25th, things really get rocking. And every weekend's going to have a number of air shows every weekend until July.
Okay. And then it gets warm.
Come find me. Let's play.
All right. Sounds good. Michael, thank you so much for being a part of our show tonight. And thank you everyone out there for joining us. And I know folks have been commenting about how much they appreciated this session, and they're looking forward to more. So we'll get that on the schedule as well, and let you know about it. Again, thank you for joining us. If you have any thoughts about future topics you'd like to hear more about, send Leah Block an email at media@cafhq.org. Michael, thanks. Have a great evening, everyone. For the Commemorative Air Force, I'm Steve Buss. Good night.
Thank you.